Electric Fire 2 Hidden Chains Chapter 12.
The truck has been on the road for quite some time. It would take a while before we'd arrive to Green Hills and search for that blue pest. Metal Sonic returned about an hour ago. I had a feeling Shadow would fail us anyway. Metal returned beat up, but not heavily. He was still able to function properly. But according to Metal, he was beaten by that blue hedgehog. This ate away his energy, but Shadow hadn't came back and I couldn't track him. Either the other hedgehog was holding him as a hostage or they teamed up. Stone had put too much trust into that other hedgehog. I don't think I could trust Stone's judgment. It's time for plan B. I put the truck in auto mode so it would drive on its own. Stone stayed in the passenger seat. He didn't follow me to the back of the truck to the lab, but Metal did. Robots were more trustworthy, I've always thought, but it seems they're better than an anamorphic hedgehog as well. Humans and hedgehogs weren't trustworthy in the slightest, though Stone has been very loyal as a partner. He is probably the only human that is trustworthy. He just needs to work on his judgment. Little did Shadow know that I had taken a few samples from him as an quill and a piece of his chest for when he was unconscious before it was back when I had to make him those bands to help him contain his power. But now it is time to put these materials to good use. I prepared the machine again to create a new robot or an android like I had done with Metal Sonic, but this time I was going for an exact replica. A replica of Shadow. I had to use the computer and copy the blueprints I used for Metal onto a new page, then I changed the design of it to make it look more like Shadow before putting the samples into the machine. I waited for the machine to create the android. I fixed Metal's battle marks. I needed to obtain him as well. He just wasn't ready to take on Sonic after all. I'd have to put a casing around the quill so Sonic wouldn't be able to drain his energy, and he's also going to need a few adjustments as well. I was finished repairing Metal by the time the machine was halfway done creating the newest addition to the robotic empire. I had enough time to make the bands I made before for the real Shadow. I couldn't just leave his wrist bare. If I wanted this to work, he'd have to look exactly like Shadow even to the bands. Everything was coming together as planned once the machine were finished well and I could work on upgrading Metal Sonic. As for the robot I was creating, well, he had a few different moves than Shadow. For one, he has laser weapons along with missiles. I couldn't get his actual powers to work with the android since I didn't know what materials I would need in my truck. So actual weapons would have to work. As long as Stone didn't try to get him to use any moves, we would be okay. The machine was almost done by the time I finished the bends. I didn't have anything else to work on at the time, so I went to check on Agent Stone. By now it was dark out. The truck was still driving on the road just fine, no traffic. At least Stone had fallen asleep. I checked back on the machine right as it hit 100%. The truck hit a bump, causing a bunch of things to fall onto the floor, but I didn't care as I peered through the glass door. My newest creation was successful. He looked exactly like his hedgehog counterpart, way more than Metal Sonic. I opened the door to put the bands over his metallic wrists. It felt different to me. I was used to handling the real hedgehog, but this was all metal. The gloves and shoes were so realistic looking to its material, but yet he's 100%. Even the fur-like texture looked real, but it was painted on. He didn't look metal at all. This was glorious, definitely a step up from my previous creation. The bands fit perfectly on him. He awoke after I had put them on. No words were spoken between us, but now I had more work to do. I looked to Metal Sonic. He approached me afterwards. He knew what I needed to do. I had to take the quill out of him in order to make a case over it to protect it from Sonic. But it would still be able to give energy to Metal to power him up, and like the Shadow android I created, he didn't have to rely on a quill to give him power. I made something else for him. Sonic's quill had power in it, which was why it glowed and had electricity stored in it, but Shadow's wills were different. They weren't the cause of Shadow's power. So I had to create something different in order to power up the Shadow android. His abilities are different from Shadow's. I wasn't able to experiment on Shadow. So I don't exactly know about it. He's capable of using his own power. I just know it has something to do with his energy. These two hedgehogs are very different yet similar in some ways. Daybreak came after a couple of long hours. I couldn't get any sleep. Obtaining Metal was taking longer than expected. Mainly it took all night. Stone was still asleep at the time. We just had one day left to get to where we were heading.
Daybreak? I thought I had slept for a lot longer. Since Sonic had told me about what happened, well, I couldn't get Gerald out of my head. It seems he came for me in my dreams too. There wasn't anything I could do. I sat up after awaking. Sonic was still asleep. I didn't bother to wake him. I went downstairs only to see Tom sitting alone at the kitchen table. Ozzy sat in the front of him. A plate was sitting on top of the table next to his arm. His head was leaning against his hand. He looked sleepy. On the plate was a donut, with a bite taken out of it. He also had a mug sitting on the table. Steam was coming from the contents of the mug. It wasn't hard to tell what the drink was. I pulled it off a chair and sat with him at the table. He didn't move though. At least I didn't disturb him. He wasn't exactly dressed for work. Maybe he didn't get much sleep either. I thought before crossing my arms on the table and laying my head down on top of them, like my arms were a pillow. A soft sigh escaped me. I still felt tired, but when I closed my eyes, an image of Gerald came to mind. I opened my eyes quickly. I know he is gone, but the thought of him just doesn't settle right. Not after what Sonic had told me about him. It would be best if I could forget him now and move on. After all, there were bigger things to worry about, like Gun. I was starting to get the same feeling as before. I wasn't safe here. I doubt anywhere on this planet would be deemed as safe for me. I may have to go to another planet. I decided against the thought of leaving this place. I didn't want to leave my new friends. Perhaps I could find a way to stay here. I made it worked out for Sonic, so maybe it could work for me. Tom moved a bit, which caught my attention. He was alert now, looking around a bit before noticing me. He yawned a bit, but said nothing. We exchanged glances, but that was it. Tom seemed a bit too tired to speak. I didn't feel like talking anyway. I just didn't know what to say. Tom reached for the mug and took a sip of it. The steam was starting to die down now. He then ate the donut after setting the mug down. I wasn't hungry at the time, nor was I thirsty. Mainly tired as well, but I wasn't quite sure how to dream without my problems finding a way to slip into my dreams. My eyelids were starting to get heavy as I laid against my arms. Sleep was wanting to wrap its arms around me, but I was fighting it. I then sat up, trying to keep myself awake. I then excused myself from the table to head back to Sonic's room. Tom still hadn't said anything. I didn't mind it though. Sonic was still asleep in the race car bed when I made it to his room. I decided to sit on the roof for a bit, thinking the cold breeze would help it to keep me from falling asleep. I just didn't want to find myself in a lab or being chased by someone who thought I was a burden. I stayed on the roof for a few minutes before going back to Sonic. That's when I felt sleep try to get a hold of me again. Fighting it wasn't quite working now. I held it back long enough to go back to the race car bed. But instead of laying on the bed beside Sonic, I decided the beanbag chair would work better. I just didn't want to disturb Sonic by climbing into his bed. Sleep got a hold of me pretty quickly. A few minutes after lying down, well, I fell into a deep sleep.